Welcome to another episode of Call to Service. Today we are joined with LA County Sheriff Alex Villanueva. Sheriff, thank you for coming in today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I should actually say thank you for having us. You know, we are recording this here at HQ, which I think was great. We just had a chance to go through the museum and look at the history of Los Angeles, which was fascinating because, you know, even growing up in California, you forget the historical background of this department. It's absolutely amazing. So thank you again for giving us that access.
Oh, it's we were literally the end of the Wild West was right here where it ended, and that was our origins for this department.
Yeah, well, I saw even the old uniforms. They're cowboy boots essentially, you know. So it's a great piece of history, and it was great to see that. So my first question, you know, that I typically like to start these recordings off with is, what was your call to service? And then I'm going to add a little bit onto that as we go. You know, we're eventually going to have to talk through the ascension through the ranks, but when did you decide public safety was the profession for you?
Well, I was in school back in 1981 when Reagan took office, and he decided at some point that Pell Grants were too generous. So in Puerto Rico, I was in college, University of Puerto Rico, and so when my Pell Grants were cut in half, there was no part-time jobs on the island to sustain me in school, so I enlisted in the United States Air Force.
Okay.
And I was always attracted to public service to begin with, and not really on the for-profit business side. And I enjoyed it, went back to school, and stayed in the National Guard, got commissioned in the Army National Guard. And while I was back in the civilian world, going back to school, I thought, you know, I really enjoyed public service. And summer of '85 is the summer of the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. And I thought, well, you know what, I think I could see myself on the civilian side, but still, you know, in public service. So it was an easy transition to law enforcement from the military. So I hired on in '86, and the rest is history. Here we are. Yeah,
that's amazing, and it's great for people out there. We talk a lot about, you know, individuals in the military who are transitioning out, and law enforcement in a lot of ways is a very, very good fit. And, you know, it's just, again, a true testament to people who choose that life of service. And I'm assuming you started at LA County.
Yes, my entire career has been with this department.
Outstanding. And if you wouldn't mind kind of just giving the listeners, I just think sometimes people forget how much responsibility falls on a sheriff's department as opposed to, say, a police department, especially one the size of Los Angeles County. I mean, it's a very, very diverse area in both the people and also the topography. I mean, you have to deal with the mountains, the beach, the desert, and again, you know, there's so many subgroups within a sheriff's department. From patrol, you run the courts, you have corrections facilities, search and rescue. I mean, it's pretty impressive, the amount of responsibility that falls within a sheriff's department. When you started, where did you start?
I started like every deputy does in the jails, inmate reception center. It was like a processing center for inmates. And that was back in '86. I went to patrol in early '91, went to East LA Station, and that was, as everybody knows that's gone through patrol, it's like the funnest time of your career. You're your own boss, and you never know what's going to happen one day the next. So it's fun. But for the department as a whole, we're kind of unique in terms of probably all law enforcement agencies in the nation. We're by far the largest sheriff's department. It's not even close to the second. And the population for LA County is the largest county. It's just a little bit over 10 million residents.
Wow.
And that would make it the 8th largest state if it was its own state. And the budget for LA County is bigger than the budget of 42 states. So it's up there when you look at the numbers. And then we have 23 patrol stations, and that covers 3,100 square miles of the county's 4,700 square miles. So there's 45 law enforcement, other police departments, LAPD, Santa Monica, Long Beach, and all that there. But they really only cover a small fraction of the geography of LA County. Most of it is covered by the Sheriff's Department, including the islands of Catalina and San Clemente. And so, as you mentioned, we go from the high desert to the ocean, the islands in between, the mountains. So our patrol experience is very, very varied. We have dense urban populations in South LA, East LA, and then you have the sparsely populated mountain communities that we also serve.
Sure.
And we have the nation's largest jail system that we operate. Right now we have about 15,000 inmates in it. We have the nation's largest superior court system with 37 courthouses spread throughout the county. We provide the bailiffs and security for the courthouses. So in addition to the 42 contract cities that we contract with, we also provide basic law enforcement services, all the unincorporated communities, which is about 141 of them. And that's about 1 million residents. And they're spread out throughout the entire county. So there's little islands all over the place of unincorporated.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the LA Community College District. We provide security for the community college, and those are 9 campuses spread throughout the county.
Yeah.
And then we have the Transit Services Bureau. They provide security for our subways and our buses. The Gold Line. We also provide service to Metrolink, and that's a 6-county light rail system. And then we have all the specialized assignments, as you mentioned some. For example, we have our SWAT team, arson explosives. We have emergency services, which is our rescue, our mountain rescue. We have our Aero Bureau, which covers that big spread of geographical spread. So our aero fleet is probably the largest in the nation. And they rack up the miles and the hours flight time because we're going all over the place.
I follow the air unit on Instagram, and every single weekend they are pulling hikers, bicyclists. I mean, that's got to be a pretty big undertaking.
Well, we have the nation's largest playground.
Yep.
And then the nation's largest population. People do some really dumb stuff up there.
Oh, sure.
And our ESD folks bail them out.
Yeah, it's for the folks listening, definitely that's a good one to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So what's amazing about all this as we talk through it, and you're talking about all these different roles and responsibilities in areas of the county, how many deputies do you currently have managing all of this?
We have roughly 9,700 deputies.
It doesn't sound like enough to do all of that.
It's not, and I'll give you a number that'll kind of indicate how understaffed we are.
Okay.
The average for metropolitan areas throughout the entire nation is about 2.5. Actually, for all law enforcement agencies, 2.5 cops per 1,000 residents.
Okay.
When you go to metropolitan areas, it goes up to 3.8. NYPD is over 4.0. LAPD is 2.2.
Interesting.
We're at 0.9.
Oh, that's a scary number.
So when you see deputies running around busy with their hair on fire,
sure,
they're literally chasing the radio.
And which is kind of interesting to me because I would think with all of those different roles within the department, there's something here for everybody. Motors,
Mm-hmm.
Marine units, patrol anywhere you want. There's a lot of, to me, it sounds like very, very cool jobs of it, here in this department.
There are a ton of cool jobs. And then our detective division, we have probably some of the finest investigators in the entire nation, the most experienced homicide investigators, Major Crimes Bureau. They do organized crime investigation, Narcotics Bureau. They just, the month of June, they did the largest seizure of marijuana, I think, in
I saw that.
Probably U.S. history.
I saw that.
For our department, for sure, is $1.2 billion worth of pot. And then our Fraud and Cyber Crimes Bureau, they're on the cutting edge of everything has to do with the dark web, cryptocurrencies, and all these things. They're always on the leading edge, understanding this, how they're exploited for illicit gains. Sure. And we assist federal agencies, state, local agencies all the time, and we lend our expertise because we're here. It's a collaborative effort, definitely, between our department and the entire law enforcement community.
Well, I also have to assume you're working with every branch of federal law enforcement as well, because everyone's got an office here.
Yeah, in fact, the marijuana raid, we had the DEA with us, we had the state Fish and Wildlife with us, and we have there were 5 county sheriff's departments with us, and all working together towards one goal.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, kind of, if you wouldn't mind walking me through, because not many people. I was actually just up at Cal Sheriff's earlier this year. Not many people ascend to the rank of sheriff. When did you know and when did you decide that that was something that you wanted to do?
In 98, I knew that Sherman Block was not cutting it. His health had deteriorated to the point that he was like an absentee landlord, and the place was falling apart. So I supported a relatively unknown at the time, Lee Baca, who was a chief. And I was probably one of the very few that stepped up and said, yeah, we need to change, and I think he can do it. And, of course, later on, that turned out to be not a very good choice because he surrounded himself with some very shady characters that led ultimately to his indictment and his end of his career.
Sure.
And as soon as I realized that in 06, I supported a friend of mine to challenge Lee Baca. So that was the second time. Then fast forward to 2014, when Lee Baca stepped down, I supported another friend of mine, which is Bob Olmsted, to run for the open seat. And this is when everybody and their mother wanted to run to become sheriff because the seat was vacant. Mm-hmm. And McDonald came along and won in 2014. And we anticipated, okay, we'll have a competent, ethical sheriff will take us to the next level and reform the department. That didn't happen. And I realized as I was retiring, by this time, now I got 31 years on, and I was told in uncertain terms that I will never go past the rank of lieutenant. So I figured, my wife and I decided, well, worst they can do is say no, which is, let's go out with a bang. Let's challenge the entire thing. Because I remember 3 instances in particular where I wanted to interview for a job as a captain in 3 bureaus in particular that I knew I'd be extremely competitive, and I was one of the most qualified, if not the most qualified. And all 3 times I was told, don't bother. You can't interview. I could not even interview for the jobs I wanted. But there was one job that they couldn't block me for interviewing for. It was a sheriff job. So, and it was out of their hand, the decision. So worked hard, busted our tail, and we were first in the gym in the morning, the last out at night, and all through the campaign. And we were the underdogs, the ones that would never make it,
sure,
according to all the experts, until we did make it.
That's a great story. That's a great story. I enjoy speaking with anybody in public safety, but the folks, that make the decision, it's one of those, I want to be a leader. I want to be a leader for the people. I want to affect change. I want to do what's best by the community. It's always nice to kind of get that origin story. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. One of the other things that's been really interesting, to talk with when I've spoken with career law enforcement professionals is talking about just the evolution of the job during their careers. The things that deputies are dealing with now that you never even heard of, 20 years ago. So with that said, obviously law enforcement agencies have to evolve with the community that's around them. Where have you seen the biggest evolutions for your department?
Probably in 2 areas. One, in technology-wise.
Sure.
With the advent of cell phone cameras, the issue of transparency and accountability is taken on a whole new meaning because there are now so many more tools available than there were in the past. And, well, that's important. That's a good thing. All right. And I think they say transparent or sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I believe that. But the biggest evolution in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of what we do, the essence of law enforcement, in the past, when I came onto the department and when I worked patrol, your worth was measured by how many people you took to jail. And they even wrote their evaluations. Oh, this person made so many felony arrests, so many misdemeanor arrests, so many citations, blah, blah, blah. So it quantified it, and the implicit message was the more arrests you make, the better cop you are.
Interesting.
And I didn't believe that. Of course, I was good at what I did. I wasn't the best street cop in the world, but I could take a lot of crooks to jail, and I did, when all the elements were there, the facts were there. But then I started thinking about the discretion and what is best in every circumstance. Sometimes it's not taking someone to jail, but not taking someone to jail.
Sure.
Finding an alternative. And ultimately, as I progressed through my career and I and I was a candidate for sheriff and became sheriff, I realized that the vision for the department, our orientation has to be shift from an enforcement focus to an engagements focus. And that's what it's all about in the 21st century policing. We have to be engaged with the community, be part of the community, be a reflection of the community and all its rich diversity. And then when we are part of that community, then, we're going to go through trials and tribulations together.
Sure.
We're going to have successes, we're going to have failures, but they're going to be shared successes, shared failures, and we figure out what went wrong and we move on. And what goes right, we make sure we keep doing it right. And those lessons learned, we apply them to new situations as it keeps presenting ourselves now with
Sure.
all these changing environment.
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of thought process that you identified there with the quantification of the number of arrests. It's like, hey, we're doing a great job. It's like, well, we ultimately don't want to have to be arresting these people, and I've spoken with a number of public safety professionals who believe, that's where a lot of that community policing and comes in, and just kind of changing that perception and changing the narrative. And one thing with regards to evolution that I personally feel that you guys have done, and you specifically, is taking to social media. Now, I couldn't tell you the last time I actually sat down and watched the 6 o'clock news. I know my folks still do, but people are interacting more and more on their smart devices. And what I like about that is it's unfiltered. It is you talking to that person and clear communication. And I personally feel that that's going to be kind of the future, where people are going to be getting, a lot of that information. I applaud you for kind of being one of the leaders in that realm and having that direct connect with community members. So I want to talk a little bit. I know we would all like to forget it, but I would like to talk a little bit about 2020 and what a dumpster fire of a year that was. And man, did you catch all barrels of that. And it's honestly, it's as we've chatted before, it's the reason we started this podcast is, 2020 was every year is difficult for law enforcement, but 2020 was a very, very difficult year. I mean, the narrative being thrown in the media was really unfortunate, and we did not appreciate the way, we look at our customers, but our end users were being portrayed. And one of the reasons this podcast was started was to show that human side of law enforcement. And I have to imagine it was very difficult for you to maintain department morale during that time. Would you mind kind of walking me through what your strategy was to take care of your troops during this really tumultuous time in law enforcement?
Well, one thing I didn't want to do when the civil unrest started happening everywhere and this whole thing about take a knee business, and my thought process was I'll kneel in church before God, but that's about the only time I'll ever kneel. I'll never ever kneel for anything else than that. And am I going to take away someone else's right or desire, or they feel motivated to do that? That's entirely on them.
Sure.
But my position is I'll kneel before the Almighty. And that was the start of a series of events that happened that kind of cemented, I think, people's opinion on not just the department, but my office as sheriff during the civil unrest period, because that really frayed a lot of nerves and was a challenging time because you had people with bullhorns screaming that we're the devil incarnate, all cops are bastards, F the police, this and that. And then we saw when the real violence broke out, all these LAPD radio cars being torched and people dancing on them and with busted out windows. And so I told my deputies that if that happens to your car, walk home. And I'll be darned we didn't lose a single radio car. People were smart enough to figure out that they can't walk away and expect to find their radio car.
Right.
So they started moving the radio cars with them as we moved everywhere. And they took action to defend themselves and assert their authority in a positive way without doing any serious injury. We did not suffer a single loss of human life in 2020. I was a young deputy in patrol in 1992 during the Rodney King riots.
Ooh.
58 people were killed.
Wow.
Over $2 billion in damage, thousands of businesses were burned to the ground. And to this day, some of those businesses, they're still empty lots with weeds. And all those jobs that were lost. And they were primarily mom and pop businesses owned by Black and Latino, families. And all that was lost. And fast forward to 2020, the Antifa crowd, Black Lives Matter, whether they're working in concert or separately, the move among the riotous looters of that group, they wanted to focus on high-end merchandise and on corporate America to, I guess, deliver messages of some sort.
Sure.
But then some geniuses within city government, municipalities decided, well, we don't really want to intervene because we don't want to offend, so we want to let them burn off their steam as they're destroying people's livelihoods.
Yeah.
I was going to have no part of that whatsoever. I told we about 2 hours, we sent our people where they needed to go to help other municipalities, and I had them report to their command posts and assist them as needed. But we figured out one city in particular, Santa Monica, that they did not know what they were doing. I said, no, we're gonna ignore all city boundaries. Wherever there's a problem, our sheriff's response team was going to go there and put out and quell the riot.
Which is phenomenal, and that's one of the other things that I think a lot of people forget about is, you as a sheriff's department are responsible still and have the ability to help out municipalities within that county, and it's kind of like the sheriff's department can be kind of like the emergency response for the police departments that happen to be nearby, which is the mutual aid. We're
their 911 system, and as sheriff, I'm the mutual aid coordinator for Los Angeles and Orange County. So I called in the National Guard, and then other politicians later on were trying to make, politicize that issue. I said, we just did the simple math. Hey, we're running out of reserves that we're deploying to the field, so once we hit a magical point, we need to have more National Guard come in so they could start replacing our deputies that were guarding fixed locations and defensive perimeters, so then we could deploy them out into the streets to form the skirmish lines. And that worked perfectly.
Amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And then do you think that mindset, though, of if you lose your car, walk home, I mean, it's a no-nonsense mindset. And that was the thing that it puzzled me about other law enforcement agencies, how in the country, it puzzled me that there was even thought to let them just blow off the steam and destroy properties, and because of the long-term negative implications, like what you mentioned after the Rodney King riots, how certain businesses never reopened. It just puzzled me how some agencies, decided to do that. But do you think that was also, because I have my own personal opinion, I'm curious what yours might be, that mindset, do you think that's what really helped maintain the morale for your deputies in particular, that we are not going to be pushed around by these organizations, we're going to stand here and do our job? Did you have that intent with that mindset?
Well, I had seen the failure of 1992 when Sherman Block and Darrell Gates were in charge, and that was my starting point. I said that is not going to happen. We're going to respond in kind anywhere there's a breach of the peace and a fray, and looting, arson, vandalism, all these things, we're just not going to tolerate them. We want to defend peaceful protesters by all means.
Sure.
And we're going to protect their right to make a fool of themselves on some occasions with the stuff they were saying, but that is their First Amendment right. We want to make sure they had the ability to do that. Even if it made our blood boil, it didn't matter. Let them do that. However, once they cross from that into harming other people, be it property or be it persons, by injuring them, we said we're not going to tolerate that. And at the very onset, I told my SWAT team, my commanders, there will be no, remember Reginald Denny?
Yes, the truck driver that was
the truck driver. I said, we're not going to have that ever happen again. If we have to take Air 5 and rappel down somewhere to rescue someone, we will do that. And we'll go full throttle on that. So there will be none. And you have complete authority to effect any rescue anywhere in the county. Likewise, I told my station commanders, because a certain station of another police department was vandalized, windows busted out, tagged up, and they took down the American flag and burned it. I told them, don't let that happen to your station, because you won't be going back to it.
Yeah.
So they took it very zealously. They guarded their personnel, their station, and then the communities around them.
Well, that, and I mean, you also just gave them a very clear message that you have their back, you know, and I think that's just one of the biggest challenges facing law enforcement today is, and why, again, I love having the ability to sit down and celebrate the profession, is because, you know, there's a lot of people who look at public safety and they kind of sometimes take that damned if you do, damned if you don't attitude, where they want to do their job, they want to, you know, protect their communities, but a lot of, there's, you know, back to your point with the cell phone cameras, and I understand the concept of transparency, but I mean, there's a lot of trepidation around, am I going to get in trouble for doing my job? And I think, you know, knowing that your boss has your back as long as you're doing the right thing. If they do something incorrect, obviously I'm sure you're going to bring the hammer down just as, you know, ferociously as you would to defend them. But I think your people knowing that as long as you're doing the right thing, that I'm going to support you, probably goes a long way.
That is fundamental, because one, it lets the employee know that they're not disposable. And too many police departments, their officers, they're just thrown under the bus at the political whims of the chief of police or the mayor or whatever political situation they have. And that instability breeds uncertainty among the line troops. And this line of work, uncertainty is not a very good thing at all.
Sure.
Because it pauses you from reacting. And if you do react, sometimes you let a situation get out of hand where the outcome is far worse than had been an early intervention that was assertive and timely.
Yeah.
So we don't want to have people second-guessing. We want them having a clear understanding what my intent is. So at the onset of any event, I always want to communicate clearly what the commander's intent and what the objectives are. Like today, we had our sheriff's response team out on the boardwalk in Venice and on the promenade in Santa Monica, in two other jurisdictions that are not ours. But they both have been besieged by images of lawlessness and transients, drifters, people that are with raging mental disorders and psychotic episodes that are meth-induced, that are harming the community.
Sure.
And causing a lot of fear and a lot of business just disappearing because it's unstable. So we're reasserting our presence there on the Strand, on the beach, up and down from Malibu to Marina del Rey, and told the deputies exactly what I want them to do, to be visible, and they understand what their role is, and to take action if they need to, but defer to the locals.
Yeah.
Get the locals involved when it's something that they should handle, but do not feel inhibited from doing their job. And so they're out there today doing exactly that.
Yeah, I've been following that initiative of yours, and I think it's great. I think it's time. It's more than time, and I'm really happy to see progress being made in that area.
The sad thing, though, is you would think that any ethical, competent political leader would say, "Oh, thank God we got more help. Hey, let's work." No, the opposition we got, and oh my God, what do you think you are? This is not your jurisdiction, and you're just a problem, and we can't trust you. But you talk to the residents, they're doing cartwheels.
I bet.
They're so excited about us being there. I was on the boardwalk on an electric scooter this morning, and the well-wishers, the thank yous, the thumbs up and down the boardwalk, hands down.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear it. So one thing I like to touch on before we wrap is, you know, this is a unique opportunity when I have the ability to talk to someone like you, who's served their community for so long. I'm willing to bet, you know, and the hope for our listeners is, I hope that our listeners are a mix of people. I hope it's public safety professionals, the families of public safety professionals, and then also possibly individuals who are considering public safety as a career, because it is a truly, truly noble profession and needed profession. If there was a piece of advice that you would give to somebody considering law enforcement or public safety as their career profession in 2021, what would it be?
I'd say if you're going to sign up to be a peace officer, do it for the right reasons, because you want to contribute to the betterment of your community.
Yeah.
And be a part of that community. I
Yeah.
don't need the weekend warrior. I don't need the army of occupation. I need people who are part of the community that want to take that next step and serve the community, and probably one of the toughest jobs in America right now.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, because I asked that question to quite a few folks, and there have been times where I've had the privilege to sit across from, a law enforcement officer who's, coming to the end of their career and say, what would you do if your son came to you at 18 years old and said, Dad, I want to be a cop? And I get mixed responses. I get mixed responses. The majority are positive because they're looking back at a career of law enforcement and seeing the positives, understanding the negatives, but seeing the positives, and they realize it is a life of service to that community. I've gotten a few no's. I've gotten a few, now we're going to sit down and talk about this. There's other professions out there, but we as an organization at 511, we do truly celebrate, the men and women who put on that uniform every day. And I just want to say thank you very much for what you're doing for your community, and thank you for your time here this afternoon.
You got it. Thank you.
You bet. Hope you enjoyed today's episode with LA County Sheriff Alex Villanueva. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review. This is Will Ayers. Stay safe out there.